In this lesson, we're addressing specific issues that have to do with ministering to children and teens with disabilities. And since autism is the fastest growing developmental disability for children, it'll be a central theme in our conversation. Can you imagine what it would be like for your child to have a disorder that is almost a total mystery? We don't know what causes autism, and there are no cures. And to top it all off, many children with autism do not look as if they have a disability. As a result, onlookers all too often mistakenly judge their parents and fault them for being a poor mother or father. So, let's examine some of the myths associated with autism and other spectrum disorders, as they are called. Also in this video, let's take a glimpse into the real-life struggles of families. Jesus said time and again that we are to welcome children in His name. Not just children we're comfortable around, or children who meet our expectations, but all children. So, what about you, friend? What about your church? In this video, you'll hear the stories of hurting, exhausted parents who are desperate for the church to welcome them and to accept their young ones. Let's look how the church can be a safe place for these children and their families. I pray this video will help equip you to return to your church and find out just how prepared your congregation is to meet the needs of this rapidly growing segment of our population. This program raises questions. This program is for people who find it hard to trust God. The best answers are wrapped in flesh and blood. My friends, people who are enduring real tragedies every single day. Quadriplegia, muscular dystrophy, stroke, bankruptcy, loneliness, singleness. We're going to talk to those very people who have touched my life. Any diagnosis of a childhood disability can cause fear and confusion, but none in modern medical history creates more fear, more bewilderment than autism. Shrouded in mystery, autism affects 1 out of every 150 children in the United States, and the numbers are growing around the world. Maybe you know a child with autism, and you've seen the peculiar behavior, the hand-flapping, repetitive motions, maybe the inability to communicate. Well, no wonder families affected by autism feel so challenged and overwhelmed. And unfortunately, when these families turn to the church, they find their Christian brothers and sisters at a complete loss as to how to help. And just as painful are the misunderstandings and the false assumptions and the myths that go along with a diagnosis of autism. Well, this 2-part series on autism is geared toward tackling those myths to help you understand the complex world of autism and how you can be a part of equipping your church to welcome families affected by this puzzling disorder. We begin this episode with our first myth, and it has to do with the cause and the cure of autism.
We absolutely don't know the causes and cures for autism. It's one of the biggest mysteries out there.
We're learning more and more about the brain and the body and the pathophysiology of it, but actually the cause is still a complete mystery.
It has kind of a nefarious kind of a cause in that oftentimes children are born absolutely normal and then over time they sort of regress. The research says in about 30 months' time. So there's lots of ideas out there about what the causes might be, but it's absolutely not known.
We know that there is an increasing incidence of autism. In fact, it's a startling increase over the past 15 to 20 years.
It's probably not one thing. We talk about it as being a spectrum disorder, where there's a whole wide range, where people are very high functioning to people who are very low functioning, which implies once again that it's probably not one thing with a single cause, but probably a myriad of different disorders. There's not one therapy that works across the board because children with autism are so different. There are some therapies that work specifically with different levels of functioning, but as far as one that works across the board, probably not. However, applied behavior analysis, because it's broad in its nature, does apply across the board to just about any level of functioning that a person with autism might have.
Caleb's turn. Good listening.
We've tried a lot of therapies with Caleb, and certainly different therapies have helped him progress, but we've not found some sort of magic pill that simply cures autism. But there are different therapies that have helped along the way.
Start here.
In.
Chewed.
Awesome.
They can definitely learn. They just need to be taught in a different way. And it's up to us as adults to find out what that way is. The one that I know has proven to work for my child is the applied behavior analysis.
What was so wonderful about ABA when it was first really applied to children with autism is that it provided hope. And it showed that if you worked intensively with children, that they could learn and that they could make progress.
How do you feel? Do you feel happy, mad, or sad?
Sad.
You feel sad right now? Why?
Several of the things that are out there include the use of what's called a picture exchange system that helps with communication, the use of structured schedules, which these kids really respond to, and almost giving them like social scripting. One of the most well-known approaches is called social stories, which kind of is almost like a way of giving kids a script of how they should behave in particular social situations when they're confused about what they should do.
Caleb, I would say 4 months ago, was just completely tantruming, throwing himself on the ground, slapping himself, biting himself, screaming at the top of his lungs just to go into Vaughn's. And now with our behavioral intervention and help, as well as mainly the social story that you saw, that was has been a huge blessing, a huge help to Caleb.
Good job, Caleb. What a good listener.
And as you can hear, Caleb's even calm listening to me talk about it because he knows that being in preparation, something preparing him and explaining what's happening next is so key to his success in handling the community, because otherwise it's just really hard for him.
Caleb's benefited tremendously from a couple of therapies, one of them being speech therapy to help with his communication. Caleb's nonverbal, and because of that we use what's called a picture exchange communication system to help him communicate.
What is it? What do you have there? Oh. I want more grapes and good talking, Caleb. Caleb is mostly nonverbal, so he communicates best through a picture exchange communication system, which is very basically pictures that are printed off the computer, laminated, and have Velcro. The other way that we use pictures is to provide a schedule for Caleb. And so we can use, say it's time to go outside, it helps him to know that he's going to be going outside next, and then he's going to get on the bus. Then we might have a picture of school or the next part, and he taps on it, and he's able to say what his schedule is. That's very calming for Caleb, very helpful.
This can make me lose control. Where does that go? Good job.
Another thing we've learned about children with autism is that many of their behaviors can be understood by thinking about sensory processing, how they interpret and respond to touch and to movement and to sound and to visual input. And so there is a therapy called sensory integration, which can support a child to learn better how to respond and how to take in this kind of sensory experience, and then how to control their bodies to move and plan their movements based upon that sensory input.
Hey, Alessandro! You want to go to the beach?
Nah. No.
Let's go to the beach.
Some of the therapies that children with autism respond well to are biomedical therapies, including changes in diet, or some kids are supported by medication if they're able to find medication that's specific to their needs.
Well, in our family we have Joel, who's 18, and his older brother Jared is 21, who also has autism, but he is on the other end of the spectrum. He is nonverbal, and he has a hard time walking at times, and we've done a lot of therapy with both the boys, and some of them both completely different. Joel is very hypersensitive in all his senses, and Jared is very hyposensitive to senses. So Joel needs the sound down, Jared needs the sound up. So it's been a unique challenge blending the two of them together. We've done a lot of different therapies with Joel and Jared, from communication therapy to applied behavior analysis to horseback riding therapy. What else have we done? Seems like you name it, we've done it, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Auditory training, the lift speech therapy. We're also on a special diet. Joel is a gluten-free, casein-free child.
I don't like gluten-free because it tastes bad.
He's actually learned to be a very good cook. He cooks gluten-free foods, but we tried it with Jared and it didn't make any changes for him. So some things that work for Jared didn't necessarily work for Joel, or maybe 2 years down the line it would switch and it would work for one and not for the other. So I always tell parents, go ahead and try it. It may not work now, and that's okay. It may work again later.
People with autism can learn. The question is, can we teach them? Which leads us to the second myth. Do people who have autism also have mental retardation? I know that's a sensitive subject, but if we are going to tackle this prevailing myth, we've got to acknowledge some of the fallacies in today's culture, and that includes language. Whether it's the bully on the playground or the Hollywood movie, people with autism are often portrayed as ignorant, stupid, and dumb. And this is one myth we have got to address head on.
1 minute, what are you going to do right now?
I'm working.
Trains?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm working. I'm working. Okay.
I think people can come to the conclusion that a child with autism has mental retardation simply by the fact that they learn very differently.
We'll set it for 1 minute. We'll count.
And because they're not used to seeing an individual learn the way a child with autism may be learning, they may assume that they're not really understanding what they're receiving. And the truth of the matter is they're processing that information very differently.
40, 41, 42, 43.
They've tried saying Alessandro was mentally retarded. They've tried saying Alessandro wouldn't do many things that he's now doing.
You feel that you want to tell them everything that you know about your child. That he can do this and he can do that. And I've done that, and I know Herman has done that. But to hear it from a parent, I mean, the teacher will look at you and say, well, of course you believe in him. He's your child. You believe in him. But we know, we're the professionals. We're the teachers. I have not seen him spell one word.
We'd have to show up and I'd take my laptop and show the video of him reading flashcards. And the teachers, everyone would, okay, they'd have to close their books and change the direction that they were trying to pigeonhole Alessandro, where they wanted to isolate him. Look, you wanna
go to Target?
It's the saddest, most, horrific feeling you could feel in your heart when someone doesn't believe in your child.
We used to think that almost all children with autism also had mental retardation. And now we know that that's not true. And we're surprised all the time with what kids are able to understand and what they're able to learn and to show us.
And in some situations where a person with autism kind of comes out of it through or progresses through training, other types of interventions, that you can find that actually there's quite a lot going on there, so that the intellectual disability notion is actually quite a myth.
You may have a child with autism who's actually a genius, intellectually very, very smart, but the way they process and interact socially is very different. That might lead someone to believe they have mental retardation.
Can I have songs?
Tell me what songs are on here.
Topsy Turvy, You've Got a Friend in Me, Stand By Me, Streets of Gold, The Dwarfs, Your Little Song, Out There, Family, the Unbirthday Song.
And?
Topsy Turvy Reply.
Good job. You did an excellent job telling me the songs on there.
The challenge is for children to show us what they know. And oftentimes they have difficulty because they may have difficulty with motor control or just their ability to speak. They may have a difficulty with their ability to use their hands. And so they really don't have a way of showing us what they know. But we never want to underestimate what kids can do, because we're often so impressed with what children actually are understanding and what they're thinking about when we finally are able to connect and communicate with them.
Children with autism, adults with autism can learn. It's a matter of, can we teach them? How do we teach them? If one way doesn't work, we have to try something else.
They are, complete on the inside, and they just need the tools to be able to let other people know what they know, and that could be PECs, that could be using a typing board, or just accessible tools that they can use.
Look at Daddy. Look at Daddy. Look at Daddy. Good looking. What do you want? You want some? What do you want? Okay, I know, but we're not going to school today.
I can certainly understand how someone may look at Caleb, for instance, and think that he has mental retardation, when in fact he has autism. And there is a difference between the two. Sometimes children or persons will certainly have dual diagnosis, mental retardation, autism, cerebral palsy, or something else. And that certainly is the case at times, but to across the board assume that a person with autism also has mental retardation is just incorrect. It's a very different way of processing information and learning.
Can you see the challenges that not only a child with autism must face, but the parents too? It's clear these moms and dads want us to take a closer, a deeper look at their children, because there's more, much more, than what we assume or see at first glance. And this leads to the third myth. All people with autism behave the same.
Well, every individual with autism is unique, just like every person is unique. There are certainly some similarities that we have seen in Caleb and other children with autism, in particular with learning styles and behavior patterns. But there's no across the board, this is exactly how a person with autism is going to behave every time in every situation. So there's a uniqueness when it comes to persons with autism.
They have their own special interests, their own way of responding to the world in terms of sound and movement and what they like to do and what's hard for them to do. And also their development is so unique because of the families and the relationships that they have within their families. So it becomes really a spectrum, and we sometimes use the term autism spectrum disorder because there's such a wide range of children and their abilities and their challenges all within the umbrella of autism. Some children that have more challenges may never learn to speak. They're really nonverbal, and they must communicate with gestures and with looks or with a sound, but never develop words per se. Other children who still have a diagnosis of autism may be very verbal and be able to really talk in a conversation.
Now let me tell you how things are supposed to work. The sun grows the food, the ants pick the food, the grasshoppers eat the food.
And the birds eat the grasshoppers.
And yet, within that conversation, they still have restricted interests and some difficulty with a conversation within language.
No, what do you want to eat?
I don't know.
Okay, no food then.
Can I have food?
Then tell me something you want to eat.
Joel started speech therapy when he was 2 and very eclectic in his speech. And I never would have dreamed that when he was 15, he would start speaking to thousands of people. He was given the opportunity through the Autism Tree and Project Foundation to come and share his art because they wanted to show people that kids with autism could do many things. And then they saw that he loved to speak, and that's where that all started.
We cannot assume that all autistic children are the same because they're not. And in Billy's case, when it comes to memorization, whether it's math or reading, he can memorize almost anything.
Let's read the next page.
Says about
Sorry
about that bus cry.
I find that the autism spectrum has more of a diverse representation of people's capacities than sort of what we consider typical development.
You can tell these boys and girls are in loving, supportive families. And one of those you've met thus far is the family of Steve Bundy. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Johnny, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of this episode.
Look, I got to thank you and Melissa for the way you've been bearing your souls about Caleb. You guys really understand the challenges of autism. But because you're the managing director of our Christian Institute on Disability here at Johnny and Friends, I want you to help me tackle this next myth. And that is that autism is somehow a result of poor parenting or lack of discipline.
Johnny, of all the myths that we are tackling, no myth could be more damaging to families than this myth. And that is, after all the love, energy, and sacrifice that parents have poured out for their child, the myth that somehow autism is their own fault.
Okay, you start reading this and I'll get this. I know. Ready? I know, and we're almost done. We're almost done. Look it. Alessandro. Oh no, oh no!
Autism is not the result of poor parenting and lack of discipline. I used to think that before I had children in my early 20s. I was working and I was in a mall and I saw this mother with her very overgrown child in a stroller, who obviously the child, I felt, was just too big to be in that stroller, but he was having what I now know to be a meltdown. He was having a meltdown. And in my view, he was just completely spoiled and was having a tantrum. And I thought, my goodness, when I have my kids, I am going to discipline them and I am going to have them behave appropriately in public. And here I am, 15 years later. I have the little boy, I have the big boy in the stroller who is having the meltdown at Target. That's my child.
No.
The idea that autism is a result of poor parenting actually grew out of the man who initially described autism, which was Leo Kanner back in the 40s, and he said that it was due to icebox parenting. But in reality, the parenting of children with autism is not a contributing factor, by and large, to the cause of autism. Parents can be the most loving, affectionate, wonderful parents in the world, and a child will still potentially develop autism.
We've had many instances where people have been quite blatant and quite rude about our children and about our parenting. I've actually even had people come to me and say, it must be the sins of the parents that you have 2 kids with special needs. I even had somebody say, why would you want to give blood? Because of your kids the way they are, And it's been floored. Sometimes I just am stunned at what people can say and how rude and how mean they are. And at first I would grieve for weeks about it and stew about it and think over and over. And finally the Lord just really has calmed my heart, because it's really about between Him and us about our kids. And He knows that when I give the best that I can give each day. And so now when somebody says something, it may sting, but then I go, you know what, tomorrow it's going to be a great story.
Whoops. Caleb, you need to stand up on your own, please.
We've certainly heard comments about discipline issues, not only about Caleb, but about other children and families we know with a child with autism. And you know, it really hurts as a parent. It hurts to hear those kind of comments, but we understand they're comments from ignorance. That people don't understand what autism is about or how it affects the behaviors of a child, especially as they're trying to deal with the effects of autism upon themselves and how they're processing information and trying to conduct themselves in different situations.
There's many good parents out there who have autistic children that have behaviors that may mimic some children's behavior who it's just lack of discipline.
No construction. Listen, you want your glasses? Hey, no.
But with autistic kids, in many ways, it's not that. It's just the opposite. There's very loving parents taking care of these children. However, there's areas in the child's life that they need to learn how to express themselves and deal with different stresses or situations that come up.
Show me like this. Show me.
I want to be
I know, show me like this. How does that?
Be gentle.
Yeah, we're going to be gentle.
I experience working with families that the child has some of the best parents that I've ever met. And certainly, I think if anything, a parent that has a child that receives a diagnosis of autism responds by increasing their attention to their parenting. And really, I tend to experience that children with autism have parents that are exceptional parents.
On your own, buddy. Okay. You're such a good listener. You just need to go a little bit more.
Oftentimes parents of children with autism will get the worst stares or hear the worst things from people who are around them who just don't understand. And that's one of the things that probably breaks my heart more than anything else, that a society that doesn't understand these children will quickly judge a parent and demean them and put them down because of what they see when they have no understanding at all of what goes into the parenting of a child with autism.
Look at the bark is right here. Look, Alessandra.
Friends, I know you're having your eyes open to the world of autism, but we just can't leave these families to fend for themselves.
Autism requires that we ask for help, and there's no better place to go for help than the church. Families like mine benefit tremendously when Christians dive in and make an impact. It certainly has made a difference in my family, Johnny.
Finally, if you're viewing this episode on DVD, we encourage you to watch the special feature with author and psychiatrist Dr. Laura Hendrickson. She shares from her personal story of parenting a son on the autism spectrum. Or you can use the enclosed study guide to lead a small group in discussing ways to come alongside and support these families affected by autism. In our next episode, we are going to take an honest look at the challenges the church faces and then help the body of Christ get better prepared to embrace families like the ones we've met thus far. So join us next time for Autism, Truth for the Church.